So let's now turn to the second phase or second component of our human resource management process. And here we're looking at having how we can help manage having employees that are both adapted to our work environment and the strategic direction of the organisation, and that are competent in their jobs and that they have up-to-date skills, knowledge and abilities. So what we're trying to do here is achieve the best possible conditions so that our employees can achieve to their best capacity. And so the two ways that we try and do that are through orientation and through employee training. Orientation being how we actually introduce a new employee to the job and orientate them to the organisation. In my experience, this is rarely done well, but over time, you start to get a feel for the organisation and a feel for the job. And so the kind of faster that you can do that well by getting people to, often the things that get stuck points are like getting someone a computer and getting their login and all that sort of stuff, which just as a new employee can feel a bit of a grind, but is also often the case more often in larger organisation where the wheels turn a little bit more slowly. In smaller organisations, they tend to be a little bit more nimble. And so orientation can be as simple as just getting to meet everyone in the office, getting set up on the job and getting started. But depending on the complexity of the organisation and the actual role, the sort of on-ramping process can take a little while. And then training is the way that we can try and either adapt our employees or improve their performance in some way, shape or form. So training often occurs when there's new compliance needed. So, at the moment we're seeing a lot of training being involved on safe practices for managing COVID. Often we'll have things related to training around employee responsibilities when it comes to things like discrimination or sexual harassment, stuff like that. But generally speaking, what we want to be doing when we're thinking about training is looking at our organisation's strategic goals again. So going back to where do we want this organisation to go? What's our objectives? What's our sort of North Star? Where are we headed? And what is actually needed to be done in order to achieve those organisational goals. And if there's a gap, so once we sort of then drill down to each person and what their role is, if there's a particular gap that we can identify, then that could be a need for training. So that could be anything from, behavioural aspects in terms of the way that people work together, do they need training around how they interact with people? Do they need training around time management? All sorts of personal or interpersonal stuff, as well as practical skills. So, maybe they need computer training or training on some kind of aspect of technology or equipment that is being used in the organisation as an important part of the strategic goals of the organisation. Or other particular skills. So, maybe if you've got a bookkeeper, they might need to be trained in new software or in new techniques. So, for example, when the GST came in, a lot of accounts people needed to have specific training around that because it was a change in the external environment that affected their jobs. And so there was training needed in order to improve their skills in that area. And so we would then implement training that enables people to improve whatever the job behaviours, so things that they can do and do well, is where we'd be trying to identify training needs. So there's a bunch of different ways that we can conduct training. Often we'll think of training as, you'll go out and do a course in something, or you might do, some kind of course online or in the workplace. But there's other ways that we can train as well. So anything that is actually about improving the skills of people, we can think of as training. So some ways that we can do this within organisations, we might use job rotation. So if we want people to understand different aspects of the job, or different ways, different areas in the organisation. We might allow people to go and work in a particular department for a few days or a few weeks to get a taste of what actually happens in that part of the organisation, either to skill them up or to give them a broader understanding of how the organisation works. They can also work with some kind of mentor or what we call job shadowing, which is where you would work with somebody who's more experienced than you are to observe what they do over the course of a day or a week, for example. An apprenticeship is a sort of long-term example of that, where you actually do your work under the guidance of someone who's more experienced and more skilled, and they provide you with that ongoing guidance and training, sort of almost on a one-on-one basis. And then we have these different examples here, which they specify as off the job, but these can also be done on the job, either online or by bringing people in who actually do these activities. So we can do, you know, lectures. So this is often the case where you'll have someone come in and deliver training on something. Often it's compliance-based stuff, so it might be something on safe handling in health and safety or something like that, and you'll have an outside consultant come into the organisation and deliver a training session on whatever the topic is. Similarly, you could have people go off and say go to TAFE for a university and learn a particular set of skills and bring them back to the job. Films and videos, obviously. And then we have these things called simulation exercises and vestibule training. So this is where people are learning by actually doing the work in a controlled way that doesn't necessarily, that's simulated to the extent that they're doing the job, but it's not in real life as such. So when we did our little French music festival a few weeks ago, that was an example of an experiential activity and a case analysis. So we were, first of all, we looked at the real life case of that festival and we analysed it. And then we did the experiential exercise of pretending we were different people in that organisation and did some role play and group interaction. So you can do that within a workplace as well, where you might get people together and kind of present a scenario about a particular strategic direction you're going in, a particular problem that the organisation might be facing, and get people to actually come together and in a pretend way play out how that might work. You might do it with, say, you know, customer service. So have examples where someone's playing a particularly difficult customer or an ideal customer, so that people get that experience and exposure to those kinds of customers. And then what they refer to vestibules training, sort of probably the easiest example to think of this is like a flight simulator for pilots, where they go off and once a year or every 2 years or something, they have to go through an actual procedure where they're given a scenario and they're in a simulated cockpit and they have to demonstrate their ability to problem solve and fly a plane. We might do this, say, if we are learning technical skills. So if we're learning audio engineering, we might, you know, go into a venue one day when it's actually closed and run a live show, you know, in a pretend way, but using the actual equipment. So these are some of the ways that we can think of training and building up people's skill set and building up their experience as well of things, because sometimes it's important to not just know how to do something, but to have practiced it, so that then when you actually need to do it in real life, you've got that bit of experience under your belt. You're not just aware of it and have the theoretical knowledge. So that covers off our second component, where we focused on orientation and training. And in our next section, we'll get into the last bit of our HR process, which is where we're looking at performance over the long term.